My name is Gerald Foy. Most people call me Jerry. I'm 71 now, and I'm sitting here in my apartment in Da Nang, Vietnam, wearing a linen shirt I bought at a market for $3, drinking a cup of Vietnamese coffee that cost me 40 cents. And I can tell you with complete honesty that I have never been happier in my life. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm running from something. I know it sounds like some sad old man who couldn't hack it back home, so he fled to Asia. Trust me, I've heard all of it. My sister said it to my face. My oldest son implied it. My neighbor back in Virginia, a guy named Phil, who I'd known for 19 years, he told me I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. Maybe what happened to me at 68 was some kind of break. But I'll tell you this, if it was a breakdown, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it broke me open, not apart. Let me take you back. I need to take you back so you understand how I ended up here. 7,000 miles from everything I knew, eating pho for breakfast and riding a bicycle along the Han River at sunrise like some kind of character in a movie I never would have watched. I was born in 1953 in a small town outside Lynchburg, Virginia. My father worked at a furniture factory. My mother was a homemaker. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. There was a kind of quiet desperation in our house that I didn't recognize until I was much older. My father never complained, never raised his voice, never talked about what he wanted. He just worked, 6 days a week, came home smelling like sawdust and lacquer, ate dinner, watched the news, went to bed, and I grew up thinking that was what a man's life was supposed to look like. I married Carol in 1979. I was 26, she was 24. We met at a church picnic in Salem, Virginia. She was pretty and sharp, and she laughed at my jokes, which at the time felt like enough. And for a long time, it was enough. We had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. I worked in commercial insurance for a company called Blue Ridge Mutual, which eventually got bought by a bigger company, which eventually got bought by an even bigger company. I kept my head down. I did my job. I moved up slowly, the way you do when you're reliable but not remarkable. By the time I was in my late 50s, I was a regional manager, making decent money. Not rich, but solid. We had the house paid off. We had savings. I was on track for a retirement that would be, as my financial advisor liked to say, comfortable. Comfortable. That word haunted me later. The marriage started coming apart around 2015. Or maybe it had been coming apart for years and I just didn't want to see it. Carol and I had become roommates. Polite, functional roommates who shared a mortgage and a Netflix password and not much else. We didn't fight. That was the strange thing. Fighting would have meant we still cared enough to argue. Instead, we just existed in the same space, orbiting each other like 2 planets that had lost their gravitational pull. I retired in 2018 at 65, and that's when everything accelerated, because suddenly I was home all day, and Carol was home all day, and the silence between us became deafening. I tried. I genuinely tried. I suggested trips. I suggested hobbies. I suggested counseling. Carol wasn't interested. She'd found her own life, her book club, her friends from the Garden Society, her sister down in Greensboro who she visited every other weekend. I wasn't part of any of it, and honestly, she wasn't part of mine either. I didn't have one. I'd spent 40 years working, and now that the work was gone, I didn't know who I was. The divorce was her idea. She brought it up on a Tuesday evening in March of 2021, just like that, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. like she was suggesting we repaint the living room. "Jerry, I think we should separate." That's what she said. Not even divorce, separate. Like it was a gentle thing. Like it was a soft landing. It wasn't. Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital property based on what's fair, not necessarily 50-50. But when you've been married for 42 years and everything you own was built together, fair starts to look a lot like 50-50. The house sold for $380,000. Carol got her half. The retirement accounts, my 401k, the IRA, a small pension, all got split. By the time the lawyers took their cut and the dust settled, I was sitting on roughly $210,000 in total assets and a Social Security check of about $1,700 a month. Now, let me be clear about something. $210,000 and $1,700 a month is not nothing. I know that. There are people in this world who would give everything for that. But in Roanoke, Virginia, in 2022, it was not enough to live the kind of life I'd spent 40 years building toward. A decent one-bedroom apartment was running $1,200 a month. Property taxes, health insurance before Medicare kicked in fully, groceries, utilities, gas. It ate through everything. I did the math on a legal pad one night, sitting in a residence inn where I was staying temporarily, and I realized that at the rate I was going, I'd be broke in 7 years. Maybe 8 if I was careful. And then what? 75 years old with nothing. I want to tell you about the night that changed everything, because it was so small and so accidental that it almost didn't happen at all. I was in that residence inn, room 214, eating a microwaved burrito and scrolling through YouTube on my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just trying to fill the silence. And a video popped up in my feed. Some guy, maybe my age, maybe a little younger, talking about living in Vietnam on $2,000 a month. I almost scrolled past it. Vietnam. I thought about the war. I thought about jungles and helicopters and things from my father's generation that had nothing to do with the country that actually exists today. But something made me click on it. Maybe boredom, maybe desperation, maybe both. The guy was living in a city called Da Nang. He was showing his apartment. Modern, clean, bright, with a balcony overlooking the ocean. He was talking about his daily expenses. A bowl of pho for $1.50, a beer for 60 cents, a full-body massage for $8. His rent was $450 a month for a 2-bedroom place near the beach, and he looked happy. Not fake happy, not trying to sell you something happy. Genuinely, quietly happy. I watched that video 3 times. Then I watched 4 more like it. Then I started reading, and reading, and reading. For the next 2 months, I consumed everything I could find about Vietnam. The visa situation, the healthcare, the cost of living, the culture, the food, the climate. I read expat forums, blog posts, government advisories. I joined Facebook groups. I messaged strangers who lived there and asked them questions that probably seemed crazy. Is it safe? Can I get my medications? Do people speak English? Will I be lonely? Most of them answered, and most of them said some version of the same thing. It's not perfect, but it might be the best decision you ever make. I told my son, my oldest, Kevin. He's 43 and lives in Charlotte. He looked at me like I'd told him I was joining a cult. Dad, you don't know anyone there. You don't speak the language. You're almost 70 years old. He wasn't wrong about any of it, but he was missing the point. I didn't know anyone in Roanoke anymore either. Not really. My friends were mostly Carol's friends. My social life had been her social life. And I didn't speak the language of this new version of my own country either. This place where a man my age with my savings was supposed to just sit quietly and wait. Wait for what? My daughter Elise was more supportive. She's 38, and she's always been the adventurous one. She said, "Dad, you've got nothing to lose. Go for 3 months. If you hate it, come back." That was the most useful thing anyone said to me during that entire period. 3 months. Not forever. Just 3 months. I booked a one-way ticket to Da Nang in September of 2022. One way because I didn't know when I'd come back, and round trips were more expensive. The flight was from Dulles to Seoul, Seoul to Da Nang. 22 hours of travel. I sat in economy class next to a Korean businessman who slept the entire way, and a young woman from California who was going to teach English in Hanoi. She asked me why I was going to Vietnam, and I said, "I'm trying something new." She smiled and said, "Good for you." And I almost cried right there in seat 34C, because it was the first time in months that anyone had said anything to me without pity in their voice. I landed in Da Nang on a Thursday morning. I remember walking out of the airport and the heat hitting me like a wall. It was maybe 92 degrees with humidity that made the air feel like you were breathing through a warm, wet towel. I had 2 suitcases, a backpack, my laptop, and absolutely no plan beyond the address of an Airbnb I'd booked near my K Beach for 2 weeks. The taxi ride from the airport to my Airbnb was 20 minutes and cost about $4. I remember staring out the window at everything. The motorbikes, thousands of them, moving in this chaotic ballet that somehow worked. The buildings, these narrow, tall houses painted in pastels, pink and yellow and mint green, with laundry hanging from the balconies. The street vendors with their carts, selling things I couldn't identify, and the ocean. When we turned down the road toward Mekong Beach, and I saw the ocean for the first time, this wide, blue, endless stretch of water with white sand, I felt something shift in my chest, something physical, like a knot loosening that I didn't know was there. The Airbnb was a 1-bedroom apartment on the 8th floor of a building called Blooming Tower. It was clean, modern, fully furnished, with a small kitchen and a balcony that looked out over the city toward the Marble Mountains. I paid $35 a night, which felt expensive by local standards, but was less than a third of what the Residence Inn in Roanoke had cost. I set down my suitcases. I stood on the balcony, and I just breathed. That first night, I walked down to the beach. It was evening, maybe 7 o'clock, and the beach was alive. Families were out. Kids were playing in the surf. Old men were doing Tai Chi on the sand. There were little seafood restaurants set up right on the beach, just plastic chairs and low tables and grills, loaded with squid and shrimp and fish I'd never seen before. I sat down at one of them, and a woman brought me a menu that was entirely in Vietnamese. I pointed at something. She nodded. 5 minutes later, she brought me a plate of grilled prawns the size of my hand, a bowl of rice, some kind of dipping sauce, and a cold LaRue beer. The prawns were the best thing I'd ever eaten. I am not exaggerating. I sat there, 68 years old, eating prawns on a beach in Vietnam, watching the sun set over the South China Sea, and I thought, this is it. This is what I was supposed to find. I know that sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like I'm romanticizing, and maybe I am, a little. But you have to understand, I'd just come from the worst year of my life. I'd lost my wife, my house, my routine, my identity. I'd been sleeping in a hotel room eating microwaved burritos and doing math on a legal pad to figure out how many years I had left before my money ran out. And now here I was, on a beach, eating incredible food that cost me about $6 total, in a city where nobody knew me, and nobody pitied me, and nobody looked at me like I was a failure. I wasn't a divorced man in Da Nang. I was just a man. That first 2 weeks was a kind of honeymoon period, and I knew it at the time. Everything was new and exciting, and that newness masked a lot of the difficulty. But even during those first 2 weeks, I started doing the practical work. I walked the neighborhoods. I talked to other expats. You find them easily in the cafes near the beach, mostly at places like Con Cafe, or the little spot on Von Nguyen Job Street that everyone calls Coffee House. I asked about apartments, about visas, about the real costs of living here long term, not the tourist version. The visa situation was the first thing I had to figure out. Vietnam doesn't have a retirement visa, not like Thailand or Malaysia or the Philippines. What most long-term expats were doing at the time was getting a 3-month tourist visa and then doing visa runs, flying to Bangkok or Singapore for a weekend and coming back with a fresh stamp. It was a hassle, and it was technically a gray area, but thousands of people were doing it. Since then, things have changed. Vietnam introduced an e-visa system that allows 90-day stays with multiple entries, and there's been talk of longer-term visa options. But back in late 2022, it was still the visa run era, and I just accepted it as part of the deal. The apartment search took me about 10 days. I looked at maybe 15 places, ranging from tiny studios in the back alleys of Santra district to fancy serviced apartments near the Dragon Bridge that were way more than I needed. What I found was a 1-bedroom on the 12th floor of a building in An Thuong, the neighborhood that a lot of expats call the expat village. It's about a 5-minute walk from the beach, right in the middle of everything. The apartment had a full kitchen, a washing machine, air conditioning in every room, a decent-sized living room, and a balcony with a partial ocean view. The rent was $420 a month, including building fees. Water was maybe $3 a month. Electricity, because of the air conditioning, ran about $30 to $40 depending on the season, $420. For context, my old mortgage payment in Roanoke had been $1,100 a month back when I still had the house. I signed a 1-year lease, and I remember the exact moment it hit me that this was real. Not a vacation, not a 3-month experiment like Elise had suggested, but an actual new life. It was the day I went to a shop on Nguyen Van Lin Street and bought a rice cooker, $22, a little white rice cooker with a single button, and I carried it home on a bicycle I'd rented for $15 a month, weaving through traffic that should have terrified me. And I set it on my kitchen counter and I thought, I live here. I actually live here. Let me walk you through what a normal day looks like for me now, because I think that's what people really want to know. Not the big dramatic moments, but the boring, beautiful, ordinary stuff. I wake up around 6. I've always been an early riser, even back in Virginia. But here there's a reason to get up. The mornings in Da Nang are extraordinary. The light comes in off the ocean, this soft golden thing that turns everything warm, and the city is already moving. I can hear the motorbikes from my balcony, and the woman downstairs who sells banh mi from a cart. And somewhere in the distance, someone is playing Vietnamese pop music from a speaker that's way too loud for 6 in the morning. I love it. I make coffee, Vietnamese coffee. If you haven't had it, let me explain. They use a little metal filter called a fin. You put the ground coffee in, pour hot water over it, and let it drip slowly into a cup that has condensed milk at the bottom. It takes about 5 minutes, and it's the most concentrated, intense, sweet coffee experience you'll ever have. I buy a bag of Trung Linh coffee at the mini-mart for about $2, and it lasts me 2 weeks. Back in Roanoke, I was spending $5 a day at Starbucks without thinking about it. After coffee, I ride my bicycle to the beach, my K-Beach, which is about a 15-minute ride from my apartment. If I take the scenic route along the river, I walk on the sand for 30 or 40 minutes. Sometimes I swim. The water is warm most of the year, like bath water from October through April, and the waves are gentle in the morning. There are always other people out, local women doing aerobics in matching outfits, old men practicing badminton with a seriousness that borders on religious, groups of young people taking selfies. Nobody pays any attention to me. An old American man walking on the beach is completely unremarkable here, and that unremarkableness is one of the most freeing things I've ever experienced. By about 7:30, I'm hungry. Breakfast is almost always pho. There's a place on Le Quang Dao Street, maybe 3 blocks from the beach, run by a woman named Hoa who I've gotten to know over the past couple of years. She's maybe 55, small, with this incredible energy, and she makes the best pho bo, beef pho, I've ever tasted. A big bowl with all the fixings is 35,000 dong, which is about $1.40. I sit on a plastic stool at a plastic table on the sidewalk, surrounded by Vietnamese construction workers and office workers and school kids, and I eat my pho and I read the news on my phone, and I think about how strange and wonderful my life has become. After breakfast, my days vary. 3 mornings a week, I go to a small gym near the Pham Van Dong roundabout. It's not fancy. It's basically a concrete room with some free weights and a few treadmills and a lot of mirrors. But it costs me about $15 a month, and the guys who work out there are friendly. There's a Vietnamese bodybuilder named Duke who's been trying to teach me Vietnamese for 2 years. My pronunciation is apparently hilarious. He says I sound like a duck trying to speak, which is fitting because his name sounds like duck to my American ears, and that joke has bonded us in a way that transcends the language barrier. On the mornings I don't go to the gym, I either explore, Da Nang is endlessly explorable, or I work on a project. I started writing. Nothing fancy, not a novel or anything like that, just a journal. Observations about my life here, about what I see, about how things work in Vietnam. I started posting some of it on a blog that nobody reads, and I don't care. The writing is for me. It's the first creative thing I've done since I was in my 20s and used to sketch buildings in a notebook. Insurance work killed that instinct, or maybe I let it die. Either way, it's back now. Lunch is usually something cheap and incredible. Banh mi from the cart downstairs, 20,000 dong, about 80 cents, stuffed with pate and pickled vegetables and cilantro, and a meat that I've learned to just eat without asking too many questions. Or com tam, broken rice with grilled pork, which costs about $2 at the little restaurant on Tran Bach Dang Street. Or sometimes I get adventurous and try something I've never had before. Last month I ate bun cha ka, a fish cake noodle soup that's a Da Nang specialty. It cost me $1.60 and it changed my understanding of what soup could be. The afternoons are when I slow down. The heat in Da Nang, especially from May through September, is serious. We're talking mid-90s, with humidity that makes you feel like you're wearing a wet blanket. Most locals take a rest during the hottest hours, and I've adopted that habit. I'll read or watch something on my laptop, or sometimes I'll just sit on my balcony with a cold trada iced tea that you can buy anywhere for about 20 cents, and watch the city move below me. In the late afternoon, around 4 or 5, the city comes back to life. This is when I often meet up with people, and this brings me to something important, the social life here. When I first arrived, I was worried about loneliness, legitimately worried. I'm not a naturally social person. I'm not the guy who walks into a room and starts talking to everyone. I'm the guy who stands in the corner and waits for someone to talk to him. But Da Nang has this weird magic where it forces you to connect. The expat community here is big enough to be interesting, but small enough that you keep running into the same people. Within my first month, I knew a dozen people by name. Within 3 months, I had a social life that was more active than anything I'd had in Virginia in the past decade. There's a guy named Warren, a retired accountant from Melbourne, Australia, who I play chess with twice a week at a cafe near the Dragon Bridge. There's a couple from Sheffield, England, Pete and his wife Margaret, who host a weekly dinner at their apartment in Hai Chow district, where everyone brings a dish and we eat and argue about politics and religion, and whether the best banh mi in the city is on Le Duan Street or Hoang Du Street. It's on Hoang Du, by the way. That's not up for debate. There's a Vietnamese woman named Trang who teaches me cooking. She runs a small cooking class for tourists, but she lets me come for free because, as she puts it, I'm the worst student she's ever had, and watching me try to make fresh spring rolls brings her joy. She's not wrong. My spring rolls look like they were wrapped by someone wearing oven mitts, but the process of learning, of standing in her kitchen rolling rice paper and laughing at my own incompetence, has been one of the most nourishing experiences of my life here. And there's my neighbor, an 80-year-old Vietnamese man named Ong Hai. Ong is a respectful term, like Mr., who lives on the floor below me. He speaks almost no English, and I speak maybe 50 words of Vietnamese. But every evening he knocks on my door, and we sit on my balcony and drink tea together. Sometimes we just sit there in silence for 30 minutes. It's the most comfortable silence I've ever experienced. Once he brought me a bag of jackfruit from his daughter's garden. Another time I gave him a bottle of Jim Beam that my son Kevin had sent me in a care package. He took one sip, made a face like he'd swallowed poison, and then drank the whole glass anyway, and gave me a thumbs up. I nearly fell off my chair laughing. These relationships are real. They're not transactional. They're not based on what neighborhood you live in, or how much money you make, or whether you got divorced or didn't. They're based on proximity and curiosity, and the simple human need to not eat dinner alone. Now, let me talk about money, because I know that's what a lot of you are thinking about. My total monthly expenses in Da Nang average out to about $1,100. Let me break that down. Rent is $420. Electricity and water, maybe $45. Food, and I eat well, 3 meals a day, mostly local. Runs about $250 to $300. My gym membership is $15. My bicycle rental was $15. But I eventually bought a used bicycle from a guy in Son Tra for $60, so that's free now. Internet is about $10 a month for fast fiber. A Vietnamese SIM card with unlimited data costs me about $5 a month. Miscellaneous stuff, Laundry, haircuts, household items, the occasional beer or two at a bar, maybe 100. That leaves me about $600 a month from my Social Security that goes straight into savings. Let me say that again. I'm saving money. At 71, after losing half my assets in a divorce, I'm saving $600 a month while living better than I've ever lived. In Roanoke, my Social Security check wouldn't have covered rent and utilities in a decent apartment. Here, it covers everything and leaves me with a cushion. That math, that simple, brutal, beautiful math, is why I'm still here. Healthcare is a question I get asked about constantly, so let me address it. Medicare doesn't work overseas, period. If you leave the United States, your Medicare coverage is essentially useless. So what do I do? Two things. First, I pay out of pocket for routine care, which is shockingly cheap here. A visit to a doctor at a private clinic, a real qualified doctor, not some back alley operation, costs about $15 to $25. Blood work, the full panel, maybe $30. A dental cleaning is $10. I had a root canal done at a dental clinic in Hai Chow District for $80, and it was done by a dentist who trained in Seoul and had better equipment than my dentist back in Virginia. Second, I carry an international health insurance policy through a company called Cigna Global. It costs me about $350 a month, which is the biggest single expense besides rent. It covers hospitalization, surgery, serious illness, the catastrophic stuff. For the day-to-day, I pay cash, and the combination of the two gives me coverage that's honestly comparable to what I had in the States, at a fraction of the cost. I've had 2 health scares since I've been here. One was a kidney stone, which I'll spare you the details on, except to say that I went to Vin Mek International Hospital in Da Nang, was seen within 20 minutes, had an ultrasound, got painkillers, and was home within 3 hours. The total bill, before insurance, was about $200. My insurance covered most of it. The second was a suspicious mole on my shoulder that turned out to be nothing. A dermatologist removed it and biopsied it for $50. In the U.S., that would have been a multi-week wait and a bill of several hundred, even with insurance. Is the healthcare perfect? No. For really serious stuff, cancer treatment, major heart surgery, complex neurological issues, I'd probably go to Bangkok or Singapore, where the hospitals are world-class and my Cigna policy covers treatment there. But for 95% of what a man my age needs, Da Nang is more than adequate. Let me talk about the things that are hard, because I'd be lying if I said this was all prawns on the beach and sunset coffees. It's not. There are real challenges to living here, and anyone thinking about doing what I did needs to hear them. The bureaucracy is maddening. Getting anything done officially, extending a visa, opening a bank account, dealing with any kind of government office, involves layers of paperwork and confusion that would make a DMV visit back home feel like a spa day. The rules change constantly, and nobody seems to have the same interpretation of them. I've learned to just accept it, to bring extra copies of everything, to smile, to be patient, and to always have a Vietnamese friend who can help translate. Trang has come with me to the immigration office twice, and both times she's had to basically argue on my behalf in rapid Vietnamese, while I stood there like a confused golden retriever. The language barrier is real. Vietnamese is a tonal language, which means the same word pronounced with a different tone has a completely different meaning. There are 6 tones. 6. I've been here over 2 years and I can order food, say basic pleasantries, count to 100, and ask where the bathroom is. That's about it. Younger Vietnamese people, especially in Da Nang, often speak some English, and Google Translate has become my best friend. But there are moments, at the market, at a repair shop, dealing with a plumbing problem, where the inability to communicate is genuinely frustrating. I've pantomimed a leaky faucet to a plumber who had no idea what I was trying to say. We figured it out eventually, but it took 20 minutes and involved me making dripping sounds with my mouth. The heat is oppressive for several months of the year. I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. June, July, August, it's brutal. And then from October through December you get the rainy season, which in Da Nang means typhoons. Actual typhoons. My first year here, Typhoon Noru hit in September 2022, shortly after I arrived. The wind was unlike anything I'd experienced. My balcony furniture ended up on the street 12 floors below. The power was out for 2 days. I sat in my apartment with candles and bottled water and thought, well, this is different from Virginia. But the city recovered quickly. The Vietnamese are resilient in a way that's hard to describe. Within a week, everything was back to normal, like it had never happened. And then there's the emotional stuff, the distance from my family. My grandchildren are growing up without me being there for every birthday and school play. I video call Kevin and Elise and my youngest, Marcus, who's 35 and lives in Richmond. I see my grandkids on a screen. I've gone back to the States twice since I moved. Once for Christmas 2023, and once for Marcus's daughter's baptism. And both times the trip was exhausting and expensive, and made me realize how much I didn't miss America itself, just the people in it. That's the honest trade-off. You gain freedom and affordability and adventure, and a kind of lightness that I never thought possible at my age. And you lose proximity to the people you love most. There's no getting around that. It's the price of this life, and some days it's a price that feels too high. But here's what I've learned about that trade-off, and it took me a while to get here, so bear with me. When I was in Roanoke, in my house, 10 minutes from Kevin and 30 minutes from Marcus, I wasn't seeing them much either. Kevin came by maybe once a month. Marcus, maybe every 6 weeks. We'd have stiff, awkward dinners where Carol and I pretended everything was fine, and the kids pretended to believe us. We were geographically close and emotionally distant. Now, from 7,000 miles away, my relationship with my children is better than it's been in 20 years. When we talk on video calls, we actually talk. Kevin asked me last month how I was really doing, and I could tell he meant it. Elise sends me photos of her hiking trips with little notes that say, "Thinking of you, Dad." Marcus and I have started doing this thing where we watch the same movie and then call each other to discuss it. We've never done anything like that before. Ever. Distance, it turns out, can create a kind of intimacy that proximity couldn't. Maybe it's because the guilt is gone. They don't have to feel bad about not visiting their sad, divorced dad who lives alone in a crappy apartment. I'm not sad. I'm not in a crappy apartment. I'm in Da Nang, living my life, and when they see me on their screen, I'm tan and I'm smiling and I'm telling them about the cooking class I took or the motorcycle trip I did to Hoi An, or the time I accidentally bought a live chicken at the market because I didn't understand what I was pointing at. That chicken story, by the way, is true. I went to the Chokon market, which is this enormous indoor market in the center of Da Nang, and I was trying to buy chicken breasts. I pointed at what I thought was a display. The woman grabbed a live chicken from a cage, held it up by its feet, and looked at me expectantly. I panicked. I nodded. She killed it right there, plucked it, cleaned it, and handed it to me in a bag, all in about 3 minutes. It cost $2.50. I walked home carrying a whole chicken, still warm, having no idea what to do with it. Trang came over and made the best chicken curry I've ever had. The whole thing became one of those stories that somehow captures everything about living here. The confusion, the culture shock, the unexpected beauty of just going along with whatever's happening. I want to talk about what this place has done to me internally, because the external stuff, the cheap rent, the beautiful beach, the incredible food, that's all real, but it's not the most important part. The most important part is what happened to my sense of self. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't know who I was. That's not a metaphor. I literally did not know who Gerald Foy was outside of his roles: husband, father, insurance manager, homeowner. When all those roles were stripped away, I was just a man standing in a hotel room with no identity. I defined myself entirely by my relationships and my job and my possessions, and when those things disappeared, I disappeared with them. Vietnam didn't give me a new identity. It gave me space to figure out that I didn't need one. Here, nobody cares what I used to do. Nobody asks me what I do for a living, because most expats here don't work in the traditional sense. Nobody cares about my divorce, my net worth, my career trajectory. The Vietnamese people I interact with daily, Hoa at the Pho restaurant, Duck at the gym, Ong Hai downstairs, they know me as Jerry, just Jerry, the American who rides his bicycle too slowly and can't pronounce the word for thank you correctly, no matter how many times he's corrected. That simplification of identity has been profoundly healing. I don't carry around the weight of who I was or who I was supposed to become. I just am. I've also had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself that the busyness of American life allowed me to avoid. I wasn't a great husband, I can admit that now. I was reliable, sure. I provided. I didn't cheat, didn't drink too much, didn't raise my hand. But I was emotionally absent for most of my marriage. I treated Carol like a partner in a business arrangement, rather than a person I loved. I came home from work and disappeared into the television, or the garage, or my own head. When she tried to talk to me about how she felt, I changed the subject or made a joke or said, "I'm tired, can we talk about this later?" And later never came. For 42 years, later never came. I don't blame Carol for wanting out. I wouldn't have wanted to be married to me either. That realization didn't come in a flash. It came slowly, over months of quiet mornings on the balcony, long walks on the beach, conversations with Warren over chess where we talked about our marriages and our mistakes. Warren's been divorced twice. He's got his own stories. But the point is, I had the time and the space and the distance to look at my life honestly, and what I saw wasn't always flattering. But it was necessary. I needed to see it. I needed to understand that the divorce wasn't something that happened to me. It was something I helped create through decades of emotional neglect. I wrote Carol a letter about 8 months after I moved here. A real letter, handwritten, sent through the mail. It took 3 weeks to get to Virginia. In it, I apologized. Not for everything. There were ways she contributed to the breakdown too. But for my part, for the silence, for the emotional distance, for all the time she tried and I didn't meet her halfway. She wrote back, a short letter, just 1 page. She said thank you. She said she was doing well. She said she was glad I'd found something good. That exchange, those 2 letters crossing the Pacific Ocean, did more for my peace of mind than the entire divorce mediation process. Now, I want to be honest about something else. Living abroad as an older American man in Southeast Asia comes with a stereotype, and I'd be naive to pretend it doesn't exist. There are guys here, I've met them, who came for the wrong reasons, who treat this place like a playground, who are disrespectful to the culture and the people. I'm not one of them, and most of the expats I know aren't either. But the stereotype exists, and it affects how people perceive you, both back home and sometimes here. My sister Diane, who lives in Knoxville, once said to me on the phone, "I just don't want people thinking you're one of those men." I knew exactly what she meant. And the truth is, there's nothing I can do about what people think. I can only control how I live. I try to learn the language, even badly. I try to respect the customs. I take my shoes off before entering someone's home. I don't haggle aggressively at the market. I bow my head slightly when I greet someone older than me, which Ong Hai taught me. I participate in community events. During Tet, Vietnamese New Year, Trang invited me to her family's celebration, and I sat on the floor of her mother's house in Hoa Vang district, eating banh tet and drinking rice wine, and trying to follow a conversation that was entirely in Vietnamese. Her mother, who's 83, patted me on the cheek and said something that Trang translated as, "He's very big, but his heart is good." I hold on to that. This life is not for everyone. I want to be clear about that. If you need to be near your grandchildren every week, don't do this. If you can't handle heat and humidity, don't do this. If you need everything to work perfectly and predictably and on schedule, definitely don't do this. Vietnam runs on its own time, its own logic, its own set of rules that you will never fully understand, no matter how long you stay. The internet goes out for no reason. The water pressure drops without warning. Your landlord will call you at 7 in the morning to tell you that a repair guy is coming at 7:15, and you have to be there. Plans change, things break, and you either learn to let go of your need for control, or you lose your mind. I've learned to let go, and that letting go has been the most unexpected gift of this entire experience. I'm 71 now. I've been in Da Nang for over 2 years. My savings, which I was terrified of losing when I sat in that residence inn doing math on a legal pad, have actually grown. Not by a lot, but they've grown. I have more money now than I did when I arrived, because I'm spending less than my Social Security pays me, and the rest sits in an account back in the States, accumulating modest interest. I'm healthier than I was at 65. I've lost the weight I gained during the divorce stress and put on some muscle from the gym and the swimming and the constant walking and cycling. My blood pressure is down. My sleep is better. My doctor here, a Vietnamese physician named Dr. Lin who practices at a clinic on Phan Chau Trinh Street, told me at my last checkup that my numbers are better across the board than they were in the records I brought from my doctor in Virginia. I eat better. I move more. I sleep deeper. I laugh more often. These are not small things when you're 71. Last month, something happened that I want to end with, because I think it captures everything I've been trying to say. I was at the beach, my K, early morning, doing my usual walk. The sun was just coming up, and the sky was doing that thing it does here where it turns 12 shades of orange and pink and purple all at once, like someone spilled watercolors across the horizon. And I saw Ong Hai. He was standing at the edge of the water, his pants rolled up to his knees, looking out at the ocean. He's 80 years old and he fought in the war, the American War as they call it here. on the other side. He's never talked to me about it, and I've never asked. Some things are better left unspoken. I walked up and stood next to him. We didn't say anything. We just stood there, two old men from opposite sides of a war that ended before some of our children were born, watching the sun come up over the South China Sea. And after a few minutes, he reached over and patted my arm, twice, just a pat. And then he turned and walked back toward home. I stood there for another 10 minutes, watching the light change on the water, and I thought about my father who worked at the furniture factory 6 days a week and never complained and never talked about what he wanted. I thought about how he died at 74, 2 years after he retired, without ever seeing the ocean, without ever doing anything just for himself, without ever taking a risk or making a change or saying, "This isn't enough. I deserve more. I'm not better than my father. I'm not braver. I just got luckier." I got divorced at 68, which sounds like the worst luck in the world, and maybe it was, but it shook me loose from a life that was slowly suffocating me, and it sent me to a place where I learned how to breathe again. If you're sitting somewhere right now, doing math on a legal pad, staring at a wall, wondering if this is all there is, I want you to know that it isn't. There's a world out there that's bigger and stranger and more beautiful and more affordable than you've been told. You don't have to go to Vietnam. You can go anywhere. You can go to Portugal or Ecuador or Thailand or Mexico or 100 other places where the cost of living is lower and the quality of life is higher, and the only qualification for entry is the willingness to try. You don't need a plan. You need a ticket. I'm Jerry Foy. I'm 71 years old. I lost everything in a divorce at 68. And I'm sitting on a balcony in Da Nang, Vietnam, drinking 40-cent coffee, and I have never been happier in my life. That's not a tagline. That's the truth.